Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Mark Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. Let's welcome Rob Lachenauer and Josh Barron, authors of Harvard Business Review's Family Business Handbook. I'm so excited to have you guys since I work in the field. And so, Rob, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, then Josh can tell us a little bit about his.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having us on. We really appreciate it. I look forward to the conversation. Let's see, my background, business background. My dad was head of sales at Wilson Sporting Goods. So he kind of got me into the world of business. First job with Frito-Lay, and then Harvard Business School, and then 17 years as a partner at Boston Consulting Group. Wrote a book there called Hardball. Are you playing to play or playing to win? Which is about competitive strategy in business. But when our third daughter, Sophie, arrived, I just couldn't do it all and decided to go on the dad track rather than the BCG partner track, and did a couple of early stage startups in material science, and then joined the company that became Banyan. And about 9 years ago exactly, Josh and I and 3 others started Banyan Family Business Advisors. And I've been the CEO and one of the partners since the beginning. And I'm proud to say I'm the co-author of this book with Josh Barron.
I wish I would have been your friend when I was a kid and using Jack Kramer or Wilson autograph rackets.
We had those, and I one time got a call from O.J. Simpson, but that's a whole nother story.
Was that while he was riding in the Jeep?
No, it was a little bit before that. He was awesome. He was really awesome.
All right, sounds good. And by the way, your book Hardball, how long ago did that come out?
That came out about 20 years ago. It did really well. It sold about 50,000 copies. Again, it was with Harvard Business School Press. And it was about competitive strategy. And we offered 6 kind of hardball strategies about how to win in the marketplace. We found that many of our clients, I co-authored with another BCG partner, and we got a little frustrated with our clients sometimes because they were what we called playing to play, which is a little bit just kind of taking the momentum they were given as managers and leaders instead of really trying to forge new ways to compete.
Well, if that book is still relevant, send it to me and we'd like to have you back and talk about that book.
It'll be fun to do with my co-author on that one too. Thank you.
And so Josh, tell us about your background.
Sure. Like Rob, started professionally in the consulting world. I went to competitor BCG, a Bain & Company, and then I joined a spinoff of Bain called Bridgespan that works with large foundations and nonprofit organizations. And so my first experience working with families was more on philanthropy. And then similar time to Rob, I was just trying to figure out what to do next, got introduced to someone who became one of our partners, became one of my partners, and been doing this work ever since. And I've had the great pleasure to work with family businesses all around the world, a lot in Latin America and Southeast Asia, some Africa, Middle East. It's a really amazing thing that we get to do, work with these companies. My academic background, a little bit in business, but mostly in international politics. And so I actually did a PhD studying like long-term patterns. Why is it that sometimes the great powers, the most powerful countries in the world, why do they sometimes get along really well and other times they fight to the death? And wrote a book on that did not sell 50,000 copies. But kind of trying to explain that. And I've actually been able, one of the nice things I like about this job is it kind of brings everything together. A lot of the concepts we talk about conflict actually come from that work. And I teach at Columbia Business School. One of the classes is called Managing Conflict in Family Business, and then also a kind of a core class on family business management. So thank you so much for having me here too.
And how long ago did that book come out? Because that sounds really interesting as well.
Yeah, well, it definitely did not make the bestseller list. Let's see, would have been 2011, I think it was when it came out.
Well, if you have a chance, send me the electronic version or the print version. Maybe we could
Sure.
have you back for that, because I think that tells a lot about why even companies succeed and fail, is my guess from reading that book. So I'd be interested to know more. Rob, why did you guys write this book and why this title?
reasons we wrote the book is that most people don't know that family businesses are the predominant form of ownership of companies worldwide. It depends upon how you measure what they are and all the measurements, but somewhere between, by country, 35% and 85% of all companies are owned by families. And it can be a husband and wife, it could be siblings, it could be cousins. So they're everywhere, and they're not covered very much. You read the Wall Street Journal, I would say 5% of the coverage is probably family businesses, and the coverage that they get is just full of myths. There's a myth that they're full of terrible conflict, and what we find is often the families are avoiding conflict, and we'll talk about that probably later. There's this myth called the 3-generation rule that the founder comes in, the second generation does okay, and the third generation messes it all up. It's not true. And we could list about 10 other myths that we found in our work were not true with these great families that we have as clients. What we did find is that they, when done well, family business, we call it, as the best form of capitalism. It's a form of capitalism that not only is profitable, but it gives a lot back to the communities and gives a lot back to the employees. And we should talk about that. The other reason, of course, Mark, is if Susan Francis is our editor at HBR, if she calls you and says, hey, would you like to write a book? We agreed that yes is a good answer.
Of course. And no better press publishing house to work for than those guys.
They were great.
Because I'd say probably at least a third of the authors I interview end up from Harvard Press, because they're just great, thoughtful books. And that's what I like about them. Josh, what are the 3 things you were hoping that readers who read this book walk away with?
Yeah, one thing is that to avoid searching for a silver bullet, there's not a right way to run and manage a family business. Sometimes especially in my work in Asia, there's sort of this, we just need to write a family constitution. If we write a family constitution, all our problems will be solved. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So there are very few things that we would describe as best practices, meaning that they're the singular way to do things. In fact, I think we could probably count them on one hand without using all of our fingers. So that's one, is that there's not a right answer. The second thing is actually, but there's a lot to be learned. This is a field that's been around. It's relatively recent in terms of people studying family businesses in a distinctive and serious way. But we've learned a lot. And to Rob's, the question about why writing it, one of the reasons why is because in our consulting practice, we'll get to work with only a small sliver of the family businesses. We've had the pleasure of having this great learning opportunity and want to share what we've learned with others. So know that you're not alone. If you're facing some challenging issues, difficult dynamics, all that kind of stuff, it's not something wrong with you or your family. And that would be the third thing is that, don't try to be searching for the perfect family. Like people put a lot of pressure on themselves that, our family has to be, get along perfectly and spend all this time together and all that kind of stuff. I think what we would really emphasize is the importance of willing to do the work together. I mean, that's really what differentiates family businesses that succeed from those that don't, is to an important extent an attitude thing. And it's a willingness to say there's work to be done. We're going to be willing to sit around a table, ask good questions, invite perspectives, learn from others, attend webinars like this one, and really learn about how we can improve and make some decisions together.
Yeah, I'm interested, before you guys saw the list of questions that I'm going to ask, but Rob, you started to talk about the 10 myths. Do you think you can just briefly tell us what those 10 myths are, and then we'll jump into the rest of the questions?
There are probably 20 of them, but let's do a few. And Josh, help me through. But a few that come to mind is this conflict one, first of all. Oftentimes you'll talk to somebody or you'll read the paper about a family business and they just talk about how harsh the conflict is. So many times with our clients, they're avoiding conflict and they're sitting back because they worry that if they do get into hard conflict, it's going to really hurt the family and the business. So a lot of what you try to do is get in a middle ground where we call it the decision area, where you respectfully can disagree, You can work through interests and then positions and get to the decisions. The reason is that decisions are crucial to the longevity of family businesses. Another myth, we have so many of our clients, I'd say 60, 70% come to us and say, Josh and Rob, aren't we the worst family you've ever met? Because there's some conflict and there's like kind of some craziness going on in the family. We think it's the opposite. These business families who can go across generations successfully together, owning a business together, they're needing to make huge, important decisions together, meaning, decisions that could be multiple millions of dollars of investments, sometimes firing their mother, and somehow they're able to stay together as a business family. I can speak about my family, deciding what we're watching on Netflix, that's a hard decision for the Lachenauer family. These families stay together and they make these great decisions. I find them so admirable that they can do it. Another thing is, you learn, if you work with publicly traded companies, it's all about profits. Total shareholder return is the thing that drives your share price more than anything else. And Milton Friedman, he's the only reason the only goal businesses should have is profits. This is wrong for family business. You can, as an owner group, you can choose your own goals. You can say, we want to grow the value of the company. You could say, we want to take money out of the company. You can say, we want to control it for other reasons. Maybe just we want to work together. I was on with a client yesterday, unbelievable family. They're in service of their community. They own some supermarket chain out in the Southwest. And it's not about growing profits. It's not about taking money out of the company. They deeply believe they have been given a great gift by their grandparents to own a chain of supermarkets, and they want to lean in and serve their communities. They taught me how important supermarkets are to every community. I never thought about it. Every time you go out, you get food in your supermarket. It's a real statement of who the community is. So those are just three big myths that we'd say. Josh, do you want to add a couple?
I think one, and we can come back to this, is this whole idea of longevity, because, we have this sort of idea of the 3-generation rule, that there's this notion that family businesses just don't last. And, the data really doesn't support that. Most of the longest living, lasting businesses in the world are family businesses. Most businesses don't last, for very long, if we're talking decades, which is what generations are. So I think that's one. Another is just that I think there's a myth that a family business isn't a real business, that basically, if you want to be a real business, you should be a public company like, Google and Facebook and things like that. And these are the backbone of the economy, in the US and globally. They're some of the most important businesses. They're often not on the radar because the business press wants to cover Apple and those kinds of companies. But they are critical to the economy. Some of them are enormous companies employing thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees. They are doing a lot to support and sustain their communities. So it is, there is actually a path to compete at the very highest levels of the economy as a family business.
So Josh, sticking with you, what is the definition of a family business and how many family members must it employ? And does the family have to own a majority of the company's stock to be a family business?
Yeah, Mark, it's a really good question. I think people, everyone will have their own definition. I think that how we would sort of define a family business is centered around ownership control. So does the family actually able to make those critical decisions that really define the long-term success or future? Like, do we stay private or go public? Are we, do we want to pay out in dividends, as Rob was talking about, or reinvest back in the company? Are there certain things that we're going to do, even though they, or not going to do, even though they might make us money as a company? So there's a certain set of decisions that really define and shape the business. And the real question is there a family that is able to make those, either directly because they own the shares or because they're the trustees of trusts that hold the shares, as oftentimes happens in the US when we have dealing with the state tax issues. And how many? Well, we would say it's basically 2 or more, and they can be either at the same time or it can be sequentially. So there's one family business we know that's in the 26th generation. For the first 25 of those generations, it was 1-to-1, passing down. The 26th, by the way, those are all males. This was kind of common primogenitor kind of thing. The 26th generation, there were three women. So the founder had to basically decide, do I either sort of go away from from sell this as a business, or do I go away from that and have his daughters own the business? And thankfully he decided on the latter. So it's really about that question. You can be a family business if you're not running it. If it's not the family in management positions, the family can be on the board, the family can be sort of sitting in this ownership role. It's really ultimately about control over the things that fundamentally affect that business. Is that in the hands of a family?
One of the questions we have from the audience, I don't know if you two are familiar with the show. Are either of you familiar with a show called Pawn Stars? Not Porn Stars, but Pawn Stars.
I've seen it, but I've never watched it myself.
Because the question was, do you think 20 years from now there will be a third generation of Pawn Stars on TV?
I can't speak to that. I don't know.
No, sorry. Wish we could give you a better prediction there.
But we will say, if you know that show, think about them as owners of a business, and they have to make decisions together. And we'll talk about the kind of decisions. And do you think that group can get together and make the important decisions to possibly go to the next generation? You'd also ask, is there a next generation who wants to be involved in the business and would be willing to do all the things you need to be a good family business owner?
Well, and how is it going to evolve, right? I mean, the nature of media is changing, and what it means to be the Pawn Stars may evolve. And are they able and willing to kind of make those tough choices and realize that what it looks like today in 20 years is likely to be very different?
No question.
And I'm so going to watch Pawn Stars to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. You've got a homework assignment for the weekend.
But I will say, let me add to this, because family businesses are given such a bad rap. The TV show Succession, have you seen that? Yeah, that's on HBO. I watched one half of one episode, the first episode. I couldn't do anymore because there's no redeeming anything in anybody. They're all just out for themselves. They seem super kind of greedy and evil. I'm like, I know family businesses. It's not that way at all. But I know it's a very fun human story that they go through, but that's not the real life.
Yeah, I did a little bit better than you. I lasted 2 episodes and it was too stressful just watching these people.
Exactly.
And they were so evil. I couldn't handle it. Rob, let me ask you, you write about the differences between a conventional and family business. Please explain 3 defining characteristics.
We've been touching around that, but let's go right into the difference. So a conventional business, I'll just say it's a non-family business. So what makes something a family business and makes it different? The first thing is that owners are people. So imagine if your family, your current generation and maybe your next generation, were all owners of a business. It matters deeply who those people are. And maybe you have some, like in my family, so it's my wife, myself, and our 3 daughters. There are 2 of us, myself and our middle daughter, super interested in business. And 2 others are in the medical field, and another, I don't know what she's going to do, but it's not neither of those. So that matters who we are, and it matters who the owners are. If you have nobody in the next generation who's interested in the family business, you probably won't have a multi-generational family business. Their personality, what they like to do, if they are all about creating wealth and value, then your family business is going to be that way. So at BCG, when we used to advise companies, we would advise as much positions, meaning the CEO, the head of marketing, head of manufacturing, on what their strategies ought to be. At Banyan, it's different because our clients are owners and the owners are people. So we're advising not just this person as an owner, but this person as a person, and that matters greatly.
What size businesses are you 2 typically dealing with? What's the revenue or size?
Typically pretty big, by which we mean usually the lowest revenue that clients have, annual turnover for the business, is around $100 million. And we go up to the largest family businesses in the world. We have had great clients who are smaller than $100 million. Josh in particular had this great one. We learned so much from in the Philippines, about $50 million in turnover, but I think we learned as much from that client as any We also work sometimes for smaller companies because many of us love the entrepreneurs, that first generation wealth creator who is also considering, we call it 2G or not 2G, which basically means, do I have a first generation and a second generation, or do I just have a first generation? They're fascinating people because they're creators in the deep sense of the word, and they're people who are thinking deeply about what their legacy is going to be. Most of them could sell it, go public, whatever, go to venture capital or private equity, but they're thinking deeply about their family and if they want their family to be involved in the asset that they most cherish.
I have a family business that I work with now. It's a well-known national candy company, and they bought the other part of the family out. Now it's just their half of the family, all because they didn't want to sell it to private equity, and they felt that the 200 people that work there, that they deserved more than being possibly let go by this, and they felt they had more. They had so much to add to the community that it meant more to them than the money that they would reap, and the money they were going to get was enormous bucks to sell this company. So yeah, I think that's what's great about them.
Many times, if what you want, and we believe deeply, owners can want what they want. No judgment. If the owner wants a lot of money, let's go. If they want what you're talking about, which is more the case, the community and giving back to the employees, we don't judge that either. What we really want the owners to do is to think together about what we call their owner strategy. And the owner strategy is, do you have goals about creating value? Do you have goals about bringing money out of the business? Or do you have goals about controlling the business so you can do the things that you're referring to, Mark? And very few, I don't know if I have ever had myself a client in a family business that it's all about total shareholder return. It's always about, there's something about control and what they can do, whether they can work in the business together, whether they can give back to the community, whether we have a great clients investing tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in fixing up their supply chain so it's not as abusive of the environment. These are things why I think we're so passionate about family businesses, Mark, is what you see, which is they're not just these steely-eyed capitalists. You would not find our clients in an Ayn Rand novel. You would find them in very different situations because they have very complex things they're trying to do with their assets.
Josh, you write that the statistics, what are the 5 rights of family business ownership, and why are they important?
Sure. And Rob was getting at this, I think the central thesis of our book and our work is the importance of ownership. And, I teach in a business school outside the family business program. We don't really talk a lot about ownership because in the public company setting, which is how we typically, most academics, most learning, most books oftentimes are from a public company standpoint. And in a public company, the owners don't get to do very much. You're buying, hopefully buying low and selling high. You can go to an annual meeting. I've never been to one. The owners are investors, right? And as we're talking about with a family business, it's very different. The owners, they're invested in this particular business. They want it to succeed. They care about that company, whether it lasts, how it does, and those kinds of things. And when we think about ownership, as opposed to being sort of put into the hands of thousands or millions of investors, it's put into the hands of a relatively small number of people. That's when we start to see ownership through a very different lens. It's much more similar to the lens of how you think about your home or your car, which is that when you own something, you personally, you actually have a lot of influence over it. And we basically talk about that through the lens of these 5 rights, that owners of a company have 5 rights that no one else has. And through those rights, they can influence it. So the 5 rights are, first of all, you have the right to design your company. So what do you want to own together? Is it an operating company or that plus a family office, a family foundation, shared property? What do you want to own, and who gets to be an owner? Is it everyone who's a descendant of the founder, or for some families, just those working in the business? And how is ownership shared? Does everyone get to share control equally? Or as in some families, you might have a bunch of owners, but one person gets to make all those decisions, right? So there's a whole designing of of your family business. The second right is to decide, which means when you own something, you get to decide basically everything of importance about it, from the strategy of the company to the color scheme on the headquarter walls and kind of everything in between. And of course, as the business and the family grows, you don't want to make all those decisions yourself. You have to figure out, what do you keep versus what do you delegate? What do you make at the moment, as a decision? What do you create policies around family employment or dividends, things that might be controversial? So the second one. The third one is one that Rob's covered well, which is you have the right to value, which is basically you get to define success for yourself. What do you want? What do you not want the business to achieve? The fourth right is you have the right to information. As an owner, you get to know what's going on. You actually get legal access to financial documents and everything else. And how you share that information with the rest of the family, with the rest of the ownership group, with your employees, has a lot to do with your ability to create the kind of like capital that your business needs, the relationship capital. It's one of the things that makes family businesses different, is that they're able to build and establish long-term relationships that have real value. And how you use information affects, the ability to create and sustain that relationship capital. And then lastly, you have the right to transfer, meaning that if you own something, you get to decide what happens with it when you're done. As Rob said, there's the question of, do you want it to remain a family business, or do you want to sell it? If you want it to be a family business, how do you want to pass it down? When do you want to pass it down? How do you want to develop and train the next generation to be able to step into those roles? So there's a lot of work to be done. And so basically, when we said at the beginning, it's not about a silver bullet. It's about the 5 rights we found to be a really powerful way of understanding the key choices that the owners of a business have to make, which have a significant impact, and how you make those choices has a significant impact on the way in which your family business will either last for generations, or if you don't make those choices well, if you don't do the work of ownership well, the family business is not going to last.
And this goes along with it. You touched about this a little bit earlier, but what is the longest enduring family business you've worked with, and what is their secret to longevity?
The longest one I've worked with, Mark, is 18th to 19th generation. And
Wow.
you'd think by then they kind of would have figured it out. So why were they talking to us? But in that itself is part of the answer of why they had the longevity. We think common in the culture across family businesses that go across generations, we call it the law. They learn, they adapt, and they work together. So this was a family, having done it successfully across 19 generations, still wanting to learn about what the best practice is to keep themselves together. Adapt, in their case, super interesting. They're a very Catholic family, and they had a code of values, which were very akin to the Catholic faith. But some of the members of the family, it's a very large family, had married Muslim spouses. So what were they going to do? And what their value set, they said, oh, our value set, there's some fundamental Christian values that we have that overlap with many Muslim values. And they adopted and adapted their value set to fit the new reality of who their family was. And finally, the work part of it, so interesting that they were a very structured family, and they were always putting a roadmap out in front of them. They had about a 2 or 3 year roadmap of work they needed to do. It's either work on the family values, work on the business assets, work on bringing the spouses in. And that was just part of what their value set was. So it was fascinating to see a family that was able to stay together, a large family to stay together and continue into the 19th generation.
That's incredibly impressive. What part of the world are they located?
Yes. Meaning they're a global family. They have people in Europe, people in the States, people in Asia. Yeah, so really all over.
Wow. Now, I found when I worked with families in Latin America that they had many generations, including my ex-wife's family, many generations going into the family business. And interesting that they did a lot of work with other family businesses. And so if you started something and you need families in other countries, you were able to roll out a product pretty fast.
It's really cool. There is this infrastructure ecosystem behind that we don't see unless you're part of it, that they really know how to work with each other quite well.
So Josh, at what age should you see if your kids are interested in the family business?
Yeah, and I guess what I would say that sounds like more of a passive question, whereas I think that what you're trying to do is actually build that connection as early as you can. I think when you talk to people that work for family businesses, second, third, fourth, fifth generation, and so on, there's almost a common story that you'll hear, which is some version of, I've been at the office ever since I could walk. I worked all my summers probably in violating child labor laws because I was, moving boxes in the warehouse when I was 12. There is a real value in creating that level of connection as early as you can. And we're saying connection is really that sort of emotional connection to the business. And so what you're trying to do is to build that. And I think the families that are most successful here, let that blossom over time, and really try to figure out and find the right time to have this question, depending on where each person is in their own career. For some people, it's sort of that this is the place they've worked their entire life. And that works quite well. For others, they work outside, they go to school, and then there becomes a time when they'll sort of realize that's the right thing for them. And so, and I've seen there's one family business we know that, the current CEO was in a band for 20 years, no interest in business whatsoever. But that was sort of his passion. And then he decided he was interested in business. So they found a path for him to go on. It turned out he had a real aptitude for it. And then they ultimately elevated him after several years and all those kinds of things to this senior leadership position. And so I would say it's not a one size fits all. It's trying to find that right moment for someone to come into the business. But the common denominator is making sure that they actually have that connection first, because then they'll always kind of have it in the back of their mind that maybe it's the right thing for them at a particular moment in their career.
Josh, just to add on to this, I'm wondering,
Please.
Do you think it's better for the kids to go directly into the family business and be trained in the family business right away, or should they work for other businesses first and then join the family business? Because I've had family businesses tell me both.
It's such an interesting question. I mean, I think, and let's see if Rob would agree. I think for most people, most of the time, working somewhere else is really valuable. Sometimes people will say you want to be known for your first name, not your last name. You want to be in a position where you're actually having to have a boss who's not a relative, have people actually give you good feedback, which is really hard. It's really hard to get honest feedback, candid feedback inside of a family business. You want to have some success. You want to have some skills so that when you come back, you're actually able to build up your own kind of platform of expertise. So I would say for most people, we would recommend that you actually spend a meaningful amount of time outside the business, building up those skills, building up that track record, so that when you come in, you're just better positioned, I think, to be successful. Now, all that said, I'd love to say that's the best practice, but like you, Mark, I can point you to a number of people that have said, I've worked here my entire life, and you can't argue with the results. So there are situations in which it kind of does make sense, but it's interesting because even those people, most of the time they'll say, yeah, I worked here for my entire life, but I want my kids to go work somewhere else first. So it's sort of teetering on. We talked earlier about there aren't very many best practices. I think this is kind of teetering on the edge. You should think of it, I would almost think about it as a default. You should go work somewhere else first for a meaningful job. If there's some exception to the rule, make it an exception to the rule.
I'm with you. I always tell the families, I think it's best your kids work for someone else, learn other systems, really learn what it's like to be an employee, and less pressure with their last name on there, and then bring them in maybe 4 or 5 years down the road and see if you want them in, see if they've earned their way in. So Rob, what's your advice on evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of family members and aligning them with the right positions? That's always seems to be a problem with some families.
I'll take two angles in. The first one is just building on what Josh said about feedback to family members is really difficult. there's this not good thing called the coddle model, which is a family member joins a business and he or she is coddled to the top of the organization without all the developmental feedback that you should have. So that's not a good thing either, frankly, for the person, because he or she will be in above their head, and definitely not for the business. If you have leaders who haven't had all the experiences that they need to be successful at the top of a company, you're really putting the company at risk. So what a lot of our clients do on trying to evaluate strengths and weaknesses are a couple things. For family members, they'll do what we call supplements. So they will have the company feedback from the boss, typically. And the family members will be supplemented with 360 reviews where everybody is having a say in how the person's strengths and areas for development. They'll supplement with assessments, psychological and other assessments, to see if they're in the right kind of job for them. And they'll supplement with coaches, outside coaches. I'm amazed in the last 10, 20 years, coaches are everywhere. And it used to be, oh, you have a coach, what's wrong with you? And now it's like, well, you don't have an executive coach? Well, you really should consider it. There's so many good ones out there. And I have found in family businesses and outside of family businesses that executive coaches can have a big impact on how people perform. The other thing they do is they have outsiders do the evaluation, by which we mean not somebody in the company, not somebody in the family. If they have a board of directors and they have independent advisors or directors, they'll have that person overseeing the career development of the family members. That's super important. The other thing you should realize is that there's this myth of the CEO, which is, oh, that's the best job ever. I don't know, I'm a CEO, I don't know if it's the best job ever. There's so many roles in a family business that you should have your mind open to, and you should develop and evaluate to that. One is, if you're a future owner, think about becoming what we call a professional owner. What does that mean? Well, you should be what does it mean to be a good owner in your situation? Maybe you'll be best on the board of directors. What does it mean to be a family board member? We've benchmarked the best family businesses in the world and how they do development programs for their board members. It's really impressive what they do. They take it very seriously because those are very serious roles. And there are also roles in the family. Who's going to be leader of the family council? And that's a development role in itself. So don't just think about the business. Don't just think about the CEO. Think about all the roles that you'll need in the family firm for it to be successful.
I agree with you. The CEO job is not necessarily the best job to go and get. And a lot of times I have a family where there were 3 kids, and the brother thought he should rightfully, because it had always been males, but I told the father the sister was the best equipped to handle that CEO position. And he felt that it would be embarrassing if he wasn't the CEO. But I said to him, you've got skills that your sister doesn't have, that you'd be much better placed in this part of the company.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, it's where could you add the greatest value?
Yeah, one of our clients has a great term for that. He calls it highest and best use. What he always asks, what is my highest and best use? And then what's Uncle Tom's highest and best use? And I found that a useful turn of phrase.
So Josh, where is the best place to start family members? Sweeping the floor or a department that matches their skills? What do you tell your clients?
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure there's like a single best place, but I think a few things that might be helpful to consider. One is to make it a real job. I think it's good, training programs and exposure, those are fine as like an entry point, good to kind of see things. But I think those that are actually able to be most successful are really creating and building careers. And I was talking actually to one, my class a couple weeks ago, I had someone from a very large family business. He's second generation, at a relatively young age has become the chief marketing officer for this really incredible brand company. And he said, we were asking him, like, what are your secrets to success? He said, well, I always thought about building a career. And, I didn't know if that was going to lead me to this job or maybe inside the family business or outside the family business. But I know that I've actually built real skills, and that sort of gives him the confidence to do this role. Or if it doesn't work out, he said, I'll go do something else and everyone will be just fine. So you want to get people on a path, even if it's starting out in more of a training role towards getting into a real career. The second thing is you want to pick the right level for someone to start. And maybe it's somewhere between sweeping the floors and CEO, right? Where you want, I think the ones that, that I've asked this question and that they found to be successful are the ones that have actually been able to build on a pathway to success. So, they started in finance and accounting and then helped to kind of build up the systems and so on, and that positioned them to be able to step into a leadership role down the road. So you want to be thinking about how are you building up your credibility within the family business, not just with the family, but with all the non-family folks that you're going to have to work with and potentially be in a leadership role with someday. So trying to actually think about how are you creating that. And then the third thing is I would at least consider how are you sort of right in the spotlight or maybe somewhere to the side. And oftentimes, one of the things that family businesses struggle with is having your own space, something to call your own. And if you're kind of going right down the center of of the family business into the most important area, the spotlight is kind of shining right on you. You might be sort of getting into conflicts or issues with someone else. So, a lot of success of people saying, let me work on this new project, or let me work on something different. Let me take something that's not sort of in the spotlight, build up my strength, have a little success that I can actually point to over time. And that gives me a further platform to be successful down the road.
All good advice. So, Rob, in the book, you write about internal family competition. How do you manage it in a way that doesn't turn out like those popular 80s shows, Dallas and Dynasty, and of course, the one you mentioned earlier today?
Succession, yes, or Pawn Stars. I don't know. There are many things you need to do, but let me just focus on one, which is trust. How do you build trust in a family business? It doesn't come like genetically. It's not like I trust my sister because I do trust my sister, but it's not like you trust your sister just because she's your sister. If you're having to make tough decisions together, can be a trust breaker. So the clients that we see, the family businesses that we see that do this well, actively work. They understand what drives and creates trust, and they actively work it. We learned this framework from Bill Kahn, who's a professor at Boston University. He said that trust is, I call it rock. It is, the person has to be reliable, which basically means, do they do what they say they're going to do? Do they show up to the meeting? Do they write that memo? Do they send that email? Can I rely that person do what they say they do? 2, are they open? Do you really think they're telling you what's real in their heart? 3, are they competent? Are they in the right position for them that they can deliver the value that they're trying to do? And the 4th one is, are they caring? Meaning, do they care as much about others as they do themselves? So ROCC, rock. It's useful, simple framework to look at. If you have a tough relationship with somebody in your family business or anybody in your life, what is it that is breaking that trust? We had this great family getting together, next generation. There were 8 of them, and one guy was always late. He would not come to the meetings on time. He'd come like half an hour late. Oh, my alarm clock didn't come off. He was not shaven yet. It killed the reliability aspect of trust. And a family member started talking to him like, hey, Tom, if you're gonna be part of this generation, we need to trust each other. And this is the breaker right now. So it can become very practical advice off of this framework.
And that works like any business. You have to be able to count on people doing what they say they're going to do. Josh, how do you determine pay for family members?
Ideally, a cage match, fighting each other. No.
Could be a good way to.
This is something that becomes very, very controversial in a family business, and like most things that are controversial and that are likely to cause conflict, the single best way to deal with it is to have some sort of policy that's consistently applied across people. And there's lots of different policies. We talk about some of them in the book. There are some families that pay above market wages to attract people to the company in locations that may be less, where the people are less willing, or below market because they want to make it sure you really want to work there, or at market. But some some version of you get paid for the job that you're doing is usually the best recipe. And which one of the things that I think, first to second generation oftentimes struggle with is there's a lack of differentiation between compensation for work done and money for being an owner. And those things are kind of melded together and we all get the same. We're all third owners, we're all working. And so we all get the same exact salary. And that can work just fine when you've got a group of siblings who are all doing more or less the same thing. I've seen lots of examples where that works. But once you start to have people who are, some are in the business, some are not in the business, some are at the top of the ladder, some are sweeping the floors or doing whatever, then it becomes really important to have a more consistent methodology to apply to that situation. And to basically say, I think the most helpful one is some version of, this is what it would cost us to hire anyone into this job. So we're going to, pay you some version of that. And you can use, there's a lot of compensation consultants and other ones that can help. If you've got an independent, if you have a board of directors with independent members, which we highly encourage, this is a really valuable thing for them to help implement some of these policies. Many family businesses will have a family employment committee that will be in charge of putting more of an objective space or assessment of family member compensation. And oftentimes the independent directors are sitting there. So try to bring some level of as much objectivity to it as you can, as much consistency as you can, and ultimately tie it to contribution and performance in some form or fashion, and separate the idea of what you get by being an owner, which is sort of dividends and other things like that.
Yeah, that compensation is really important, not just for them, but for the employees, seeing how the family members are treated, whether they're given more and doing less, and it has psychological ramifications, and also who they're able to recruit and retain.
Yeah,
So
sure.
there's a lot of, it's
Yep,
very
yeah.
powerful. And then also when they start marrying and they have their spouses whispering into their ears, then that also adds some complication to it.
Absolutely. Just never forget, if you're working in a family business, never forget that the spotlight is always on you. People are watching you for what you're doing, what you're not doing, whether you're showing up late and unshaven, whether you're on time, whether you have a smile on your face or a frown, whether you take more vacation than anyone else, what car you drive, where you park. All of these things are going to shape the culture of the business. And the ones that we work with that have great cultures, in part because they pay a lot of attention to the ways that family members behave and act in that work environment, because it sets the tone for everyone else.
That's funny. Even the parking, I have a client now that one of the kids parks at the very front, and the employees are saying, "You're so new. I mean, like, why should you be parking all the way up front when you should be parking at the back of the parking lot and let more seasoned or people who've been has seniority get that particular spot?" So it does make a difference. Rob, what's the best way to handle a family member who isn't working out?
so I think you mean isn't working out in the business and maybe
Yeah,
should be let go.
yeah.
This is another tough issue. We two little stories and then some policy. Two stories are, we worked with this family business where one of the family members did well for 15 years, became head of technology, and then really didn't do well, dug in. And after many conversations, he was fired. And he was so upset with the way it was handled, he sued his own family business. The other, you don't want that. That's not a best practice. The other is, we have a general rule of thumb on this one, that if a family member joins a family business and is fired in a non-gracious way, they will not only leave the business, but likely they're going to have to leave the family for 5 years as they recast their identity. Many family members think, oh, I'm going to be in the family business. My name is on the door and it's what I've always wanted to do. And then it's taken away from them. So it's a really tough thing that you have to handle very well. Josh just spoke about the need for policies. This is probably one of the areas where policies are most important. There should be an exit policy for family members, how it's handled if people are underperforming. Or is it okay for everybody to stay forever? I mean, we've had clients both ways. Most clients, there comes a time when people have to be fired if they're underperforming. Have a process for doing that. It could be that you have an ombudsman who really gathers all the reviews, and that's a pre-agreed process you're going through. Or maybe it's someone on the board who does it. You need a trusted hand who's predetermined to have this decision right. Really hard if you don't have it, and even hard if you do have such a process.
Josh, you write that non-leading family members can have a significant impact. Can you give some examples?
Sure. And one of the things we talk about in the book in terms of governance, we talk about the idea of 4 rooms. So these are 4 key areas, and the work to be done in a family business happens in these 4 different rooms or spaces. You have the management room, which is where you run the company. You have the boardroom, which is where you make strategic decisions, you hire management. You have the owner room where you make that sort of relatively small number of big decisions, like do we keep the company public or private? Do we reinvest or pay out dividends? And then you have the family room, which is where you try to keep the family unified. You develop the next generation. And so if you think about it that way, the CEO is the leader of the management room, which is really important. It's a critically important job. But all of the other 3 rooms are also really important. That family businesses that succeed are ones that have good functioning boards of directors and owner councils and family councils, and they've got spaces to do all this different work. And it turns out that being a great CEO doesn't mean that you're actually going to be great at any of those other 3. In some ways, it's almost the opposite, where if you're a CEO and you're used to basically people coming to you and you sit at your desk, people come with you with decisions and you say, this is, is it A, B? And say, no, it's C, and we're done. That's the way we're going, right? That's not how leadership happens in the boardroom or in the owner or family rooms. So it takes very different kinds of leadership, especially when your goal is to build consensus, to get people aligned on the same page. It takes a different form of leadership to make that successful. And so not only do family businesses require multiple leaders to be successful, they require different kinds of leadership. And so if you're not the kind of person who sees themselves running the company one day, it doesn't mean that you can't, or even working in the company, it doesn't mean that you can't have a significant impact on its success. You can't make a major contribution through one of these other spaces.
Josh, there's a question from the audience here. Do you have any advice or rules of thumb regarding buy-sell agreements?
Yes, you should have one. By the way, if you don't have a buy-sell agreement, you still have a buy-sell agreement. It's basically whatever the law says in your jurisdiction, and it says something about what happens in the event of a dispute or a desired sale. And trust me when I tell you this, you don't want what they're going to offer. Because it will oftentimes be the liquidation of the company, for sale. Those are the kinds of remedies that the law has. And so rather than relying on that, you are so much better off developing the terms of how you want those kinds of transactions to work in your family. Who's an eligible buyer? Who's an eligible seller? How are you going to determine the valuation? These are things that families will oftentimes just sort of operate by handshake, or maybe there's just some agreement that's gathering dust on a shelf. The problem with that is that it works perfectly fine up until the moment where it doesn't work at all. And you've got this big dispute that it would have been great to have some rules and some processes and set up. So make sure you've got a buy-sell agreement that clarifies the rules of how shares can be sold or transferred sometimes, or a shareholder agreement that covers some of those things. Make sure you understand it. Make sure that it's been updated to actually make sense for the environment of today. And beyond the agreement, think about the process, right? What a lot of families will do is not just sort of say, okay, we've got these rules, but how does it work in practice? Many families will have an annual window. They'll do the valuation, then you'll have a month where people can raise their hand and say, I'd like to sell. Then you've got a waterfall process of who can buy. It's all very well orchestrated. So these kinds of issues can be a huge source of conflict. And the more that you can get out in front of them and create the agreement and the process to implement it, the better off that you'll be.
I'm in agreement with you. We have another question from the audience, and I don't know if either of you can answer it or want to answer it. Any comment on the Purdue family pharmaceutical company about how to handle lawsuits in the public scrutiny? Which one of you two wants to take that one?
I think Rob does.
I don't know enough about it to speak deeply about it. It seems like it's a family, um, a set of owners who lost their way and lost touch with what really matters in running a business and running a family business.
That
I don't know
impacts
that
society in a major way.
in a terrible impact on society, and not to like explicitly tie your behavior to actions that were so detrimental to so many Americans and people worldwide is a tragedy. Is it just a deep, deep, deep tragedy? I don't
So
know if
here, this might also follow into this. Should family businesses have a board of directors or an advisory board, and what size should a family consider this, and what should be the composition, family and outsiders? Those guys probably should have had themselves,
Yeah, I don't know.
independent board
There's
members to
yeah,
help them manage.
yes.
They got off the rails.
So beyond Purdue, about the boardroom is a really important question to address as your family business grows. The first thing to think about is what's the role of a board of directors, and it's really about oversight of the business. The decision rights typically in a board of directors are hire, fire CEO, approve, don't set, but approve strategy, set the annual dividend, compliance issues, succession planning, and a few more. Major acquisitions typically come through there too. The of those decisions, like, do we need a board to make those decisions? I think there are two things that often come into play when our clients are considering putting in a board when they haven't had one before. One is there can be a lack of expertise of the family on these topics. Well, we're moving away from a family CEO. We're going to an outside CEO. We've never done that, and I don't know who in the family is good at that. And they could get they could hire a headhunter, executive search. Many families say this is a long-term thing we're doing. We're thinking about not only the CEO, but we're actually thinking about the whole succession plan in the business. We want someone who's been there, done that, and they will put a board in with expertise on that. The second thing that I see often is the shareholders, the owners, who are a little bit more distant from the family, the direct owners or the owner operators, often want a board because they're looking for a trusted voice of their family members and also some independence that they can talk to about, this is what I'm being told. With all of your experience, how do you see it? And the family members who are deep in the business like it too, because there's this other arbitrator of fairness is what we often say. Someone who's on the outside, doesn't have skin in the game, can say, well, from my experience outside, here are the things that you need to consider. So there's no magic number, 50 million in revenue. It's more what you want the board to do and why you want the board to do these things.
So we have a couple minutes left here. And so this is a question from the audience. What are the differences between the best kinds of leaders for board, owner, family rooms? And might they be the same person? And is it best to have different leaders for all four rooms? Which of you would like to tackle that one?
In 30 seconds.
I have 30 seconds.
Question.
Yeah. So I think we talked a bit about, yes, they are different kinds of leaders. I'm not sure there is a great answer because it depends on how many people the family has. In some cases, there aren't enough spots to go around, enough people that are committed. But I think more often than not, when we're talking about families that are large enough to have multiple people occupying those, there is real value in sharing the burden and having people step into different roles. It increases engagement. It brings different skill sets to the table. It allows people to play different, so I might be the CEO, but I'm on the board. I'm not the chair of the board, or I'm on the owner council. I'm not the chair. It gives you a different vantage point. So I think if you can, bringing multiple voices, perspectives, and talents into those leadership roles is going to help, create a little bit more resilience of the family business and the governance structure.
All leadership is situational. One of the things you have to decide is, do you need a conqueror or a ruler? A conqueror, quick decisions, going to take that land fast. A ruler is more politically based. They understand all the interest sets and can find a compromise. That's one of the biggest distinctions that you'll make in each of these roles as you're going through it.
Well, I think that TV show has the conqueror, right? He's the leader. And those
Yes,
families we heard that
exactly.
too.
Exactly.
So, Josh, and this is the last question, and I'm always fascinated by what's the right answer here is, what's your advice on whether to gift the children, family members stock in the company or sell it to them? Many families I work with want to hand the kids the company. What's your position on that?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure if there's sort of like a best answer here. I think oftentimes this comes down to what's most efficient from a, estate planning perspective. You have like lifetime exemptions in the US. So, with estate taxes. And so you can gift a certain amount. There's some benefits that come through sales. I guess I would take a step back and say, what kind of family business are you trying to create in the future? Do you want, all of the next generation to be involved? And if so, in what way? Do you want just one of them to actually, or just those working in the business, in which case a sale is going to make more sense. So, I think those to me are more the mechanics of how to do it. And that's always going to be influenced by the tax code and what's most efficient. Take a step back first and actually think about, what are you trying to architect and design? How do you want the next generation involved? And then you can work with your attorneys to really figure out the most important thing. I've seen plenty of people that have inherited a business and treat it with a level of responsibility. And I've seen plenty of people that have bought a business and feel entitled. So it's not like one is going to create a certain dynamic and the other is going to create the other. So much of it's going to be in the values that you pass down and the expectations that you pass down from one generation to the next, rather than in the way in which it's passed.
Well, I want to tell you, you both did a great job because barely anybody left this podcast.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank
you killed it. Thank you so much for coming in, and maybe we'll have you back again as you guys maybe will come up with another book in a year or two regarding more things that you learned, especially after what's happened with COVID and had a chance to reflect on this.
Guys,
thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Great discussion.
Yeah, appreciate your time, everybody, and thank you, Mark, for the good questions.
Everybody, thanks for listening today. Have a wonderful day.